Today I'd like to demonstrate hooking up a Megasquirt or AMP EFI ECU to your Windows 10 computer for the first time. First thing I like to do is download and install the FTDI drivers. Normally they can be found at DIY AutoTune. If you look under Google DIY AutoTune and drivers, you will find them. Next thing I'd like to do is type in the bottom left corner of Windows, Device Manager. There it is. Double click on it. And you will see down here ports and COM ports. Open that up. And right now I have two Bluetooth connections at COM 7 and COM 8. The ECU is powered up. Hook up the computer to the ECU. And obviously the screen changed, so it is finding the ECU. You can see it down here. There's now a new COM port. So go ahead and close that. And let's go to Tuner Studio. I'm going to clear this error. It's not a problem. It's just because I deleted a project that Tuner Studio is looking for. And let's go to File, New Project. I'm going to give it a name. This happens to be my CRX. And under Firmware, I'm going to hit Detect. What Tuner Studio is doing is looking through all of the COM ports on your computer, seeing if it can find the ECU. This takes about, a couple minutes depending on how many things you have connected to your computer. And there it is. And it might find another one here. It did. But I'm going to pick the USB D2XX choice at the top. Hit Accept. Next. And these are all normally taken the defaults. This is where you pick out your temperature that you want to use, Fahrenheit or Celsius. There's a tag down box. And I like to tag internal log fields activated. The rest I take the default, assuming you have a wideband. And here it is. It found under the FTDI drivers, successful, and you could hit test port, but it's already done that for you. Hit next. Hit next. This is the default gauges. I would take them at this point, the defaults, and finish. And now we are connected to the ECU. You can tell that by the gauges went white. And if I cycle through the throttle position, you can watch it come up on this second gauge from the top left. I'd also like to save off by hitting File, Save Tune As, and let's just call it Default Tune. This is the tune that was supplied to you by whoever built the ECU, typically DIY AutoTune. And that is pretty much all it is to hooking up an ECU. If you notice in the top right corner, my temperature, the coolant temperature is running 71, which is what the temperature is here in the trailer. Now that I've closed out of Tuner Studio, if I launch back in, you will see Tuner Studio launch, and it will look for the last install that it was connected to, and up come the gauges. If I disconnect the ECU by pulling the USB port, you can see the gauges go gray. As I reconnect, you will see the gauges come back up. And there they are. I can go to fuel settings, fuel table, and there is the VE table for this car. Thank you for watching. Today I want to demonstrate updating firmware. What I do is open Tuner Studio. I've previously downloaded the firmware I want to load from MS3.com. At the top is a series of boxes you can tag. One of them is firmware. I've downloaded the firmware to a directory. I know where it's at. I'd like to go to this PC, C:, and I take mine to a directory called MS3 firmware. So let's go back into Tuner Studio, and under Tools, Update Install Firmware, a dialog box comes up. I hit Next, Backup Project Now, and I can give it a backup name, just save in this case. And it is saved off. Next. There's a flashing yellow box. What it's doing is verifying that it has connection to the unit, the ECU. Next. And I would like to browse for the firmware I want to load. Now I have MS3 firmware, and I'm going from 1.5.0 up to the next level. Pick that, open, and you can grab the zip file. And it is found on my USB port, a MS3 Pro Ultimate, recommended. Next. Accept the firmware license. Next. Here it says to disconnect the ignition. I do that. I've already done that. And go ahead and install. Next. It's asking if I want to preserve the sensor calibrations and tune data and preserve port status. Those are checked. I leave them as default. Next. And it's starting to load the firmware. This process normally takes about a minute. If you find your computer taking 10, 15, 30 minutes, there's a setting in Windows called latency. It is under the USB port that you're using, and what you want to do is set that down to 0 latency if you're finding these loads are taking way too long. But you can see the blue bar at the bottom slowly moving to the right. As long as it's progressing, do not do this with a weak battery on your computer or a weak battery in the car. I like to use a trickle charger. You really don't want to use a high frequency, high amperage charger at this point because it puts noise into your battery and into your electrical system. Can be problematic. Finalizing firmware load. Restoring sensory calibrations is at the bottom. I hear the fuel pump cycle. Hit next. And restore project tune settings is in the bottom right. Hit that. Firmware upgrade is complete. And finish. At this point, cycle the ECU in the car, kill the power to the ECU, and bring it up one more time. As I turn it back on, you can hear the fuel pump cycle, and the ECU is ready to fire up. Thank you for watching. Now that I've loaded the new firmware, I would like to verify that all my gauges appear to come up as I would expect. So what I've done is created a first start gauge panel. This is a custom I may make available for everyone to download. It does take the licensed version of Tuner Studio to have custom gauge panels. But what I have is in the upper left corner, my coolant temp and manifold air temperature. Both of those are very similar, and 70 degrees or so seems about right in the trailer. I have throttle position showing almost 0. The barrel pressure is 100 kPa, and the engine map is 99.7. Those are reasonably close. They're almost never perfect. I'm showing I have a lost sync counter. You can see that my ECU has been up for 467 seconds because I have a clock timer. My ignition advance is 0. Obviously, the motor's not running. Battery voltage is 13.4. My pulse width is 0. Duty cycle, EGO corrections, everything looks normal. So let's go ahead and run it up through the throttle. I'm going to cycle the throttle up to 100% and back. And you can see on the center trace, it goes up to 100, come back to 0, nice and smooth. I'm doing this with my finger. I'm going to roll it up one more time, and you can see the throttle go to 100%, actually 100.7%, and back down to 0. If I have my adjustable throttle position, you can see that 0.4 change to 0.8 and back to 0.4. Everything looks reasonable. We're ready to start the motor. Okay, now that I've reloaded the firmware, I'm going to go ahead and verify that all the sensors look correct. I'm going to roll the throttle up a little bit, roll it back down. Looks nice and smooth on the graph. My coolant temperature is running about 121. That looks reasonable. Engine map is running right at 100 and good and consistent. That's good. You can see my counter is up to about 44 seconds. So let's go ahead and start the car. Starts right up. You can see my lost sync count. It's still sitting at 0. That's a good thing. You can see where I bumped the throttle a couple times to get it to start. My coolant temp is good and steady, even during the start, cranking. And my engine map is running engine map is running about 45. That looks reasonable. You can see that my O2 sensors have come up online. My EGO correction's running about a -5%. The car is not quite up to temperature. I can go ahead and rev it a couple of times. You can see the engine map vary with the throttle position. Everything looks normal there. coolant temp still looks good and steady. RPM's running about 1,300 RPM. We can go ahead and idle that down a little bit. Now that we're coming up to temperature, and everything sounds good. Go ahead and kill the motor. Engine control, and stop engine. That's all there is to loading new firmware.